Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something really important,
Mm-hmm.
especially for us as public servants.
Uh-huh.
Protecting citizen data.
Yeah,
It's a huge responsibility,
it is,
and it can feel kind of overwhelming, honestly, with all the rules and regulations.
for sure.
But trust me, this deep dive is going to make it way more approachable and even fun.
I think fun is a good way to put it.
I promise.
We'll make it fun.
So to guide us through this, we've got this fascinating article by a data scientist at Statistics Canada.
Okay.
It's called Identifying Personal Identifiable Information, PII, in Unstructured Data with Microsoft Presidio.
Kichiro.
Right. I know it sounds a little technical, but stick with us.
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about, extracting the key takeaways and figuring out how we can actually apply these to our own work,
Exactly.
especially when it comes to tools like Microsoft Presidio.
Yeah, it's a great example of how technology can actually help us protect sensitive information, especially in a world where data is everywhere.
Literally everywhere.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Go.
What exactly personally identifiable information, or PII?
Mm.
And why should we as public servants care so much about it?
So PII is basically any piece of data that can be used to identify a specific person,
Okay.
like their name, their address, their all-important social insurance number,
Right.
financial information, medical records, anything that can be lapped back to a specific person.
Okay, so the stuff we handle every day as public servants.
Exactly.
But what makes this so important for us specifically?
Well, imagine if that information fell into the wrong hands.
Okay.
We're talking about people's lives, their livelihoods, their well-being.
Right.
It's our responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility, not just ethically, but legally too, right?
Absolutely. Canada has the Privacy Act and PIPEDA,
Mm-hmm.
both designed to protect personal information.
Okay.
And then on top of that, there's the GDPR, the European Union's regulation.
Right, right.
And it has a global reach. So even though we're in Canada, if we handle any data from EU individuals, GDPR applies to us too.
So it's a global issue. We're all part of this web of data protection.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established that PII is sensitive, there are laws to protect it, and we as public servants, we play a crucial role.
Big role to play.
Now, the article mentions direct and quasi-identifiers.
Oh, yeah, these are interesting.
Can you break those down for us?
Yeah, so direct identifiers are the obvious ones, like your name or your SIN.
Right.
They instantly scream, this is you.
Oh.
Quasi-identifiers are a little trickier.
Okay.
They're things like age, gender, city of residence, harmless on their own right.
Yeah, seems harmless, but this is where it gets interesting.
Exactly. If you combine a few of those quasi-identifiers, suddenly you can pinpoint someone's identity.
Oh, really?
It's like piecing together a puzzle.
Wow.
So imagine, someone's age, their gender, and their postal code. You might be surprised how quickly you can actually identify that specific person.
Wow, it's like the data points become like a fingerprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. Suddenly, this seemingly harmless information is not so harmless.
Not so harmless.
It really makes you think twice about what we consider safe to share,
For sure.
even if it's not, a name or a social insurance number.
Exactly. That's why we have to be extra careful and think about every angle when we're handling any type of citizen data.
Okay, so how do we protect this sensitive PII, especially with all these direct and quasi-identifiers around? The article mentions something called anonymization techniques.
Right.
What exactly does that involve?
Anonymization is all about minimizing the risk of re-identifying someone from data.
Okay.
It's like giving the data a disguise.
So making it anonymous,
Yeah.
but how do you do that without ruining the data completely? We still need to work with this data.
Of course. And the article outlines a few techniques,
Okay,
each
yeah.
with its own pros and cons.
Yeah.
You've got data shuffling, which is like mixing up the data points randomly.
Okay.
Perturbation adds a little bit of noise to the data, but it preserves the overall trends. And then there's aggregation, which is kind of like summarizing the data at a higher level,
Okay.
like at a city level instead of individual households.
So it's all about making the data less specific without losing that big picture.
You got it.
Clever. But the article really emphasizes that unstructured data is a much bigger challenge.
It is.
What's the difference between structured and unstructured data, and why is the unstructured stuff so tricky?
So think of structured data like what you'd see in a spreadsheet.
Okay, neat and organized.
Exactly.
Right.
And with that, we can use mathematical models like k-anonymity and differential privacy to protect it.
Okay.
Unstructured data is more like a messy desk.
All right.
Think text documents, emails, images.
Oh, right.
It's way more complex,
Yeah.
and it needs a different approach.
Which brings us back to Microsoft Presidio.
Right.
It seems like this tool was made to tackle those challenges of anonymizing that messy, unstructured data.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick overview of how it works?
Of course. So in simple terms, Microsoft Presidio uses a combination of techniques. Okay.
It uses something called named entity recognition, or NER.
NER. So is that like a super-powered search engine for PII?
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
So it's trained on tons of data to recognize patterns and identify things like names, locations, credit card numbers, that kind of thing.
Wow.
It understands the context, not just the words.
So it's not just looking for specific words, it actually understands what those words mean and how they relate to each other.
Exactly. But NER isn't the only tool it uses.
Okay.
It also uses something called regular expressions.
Okay, what are those?
Think of them as like fancy search patterns that can find very specific types of data.
Okay.
It's like having a whole team of data detectives all working together to find and flag anything that looks sensitive.
So it's this multi-pronged approach to make sure nothing slips through the cracks.
You got it.
Pretty impressive. But what happens once Presidio finds this information?
Well, that's where the anonymizer part of Presidio comes in.
Okay.
It gives you a bunch of options for how to deal with that PII.
Like, what are our choices? You can choose to mask it, redact it, replace it, or even encrypt it.
So many options.
Yeah.
So many choices. But wait, does the user have to make those choices for every single piece of PII manually?
Well, that's where the customization comes in.
Okay.
Remember that example from the article about the government of Canada using Presidio? They had to teach Presidio to recognize what they call personal record identifiers, or PRIs,
Prizes, okay.
which are like employee ID numbers.
I see. So we can tailor it to our specific needs.
Exactly. You can set up rules like always redact social insurance numbers or replace names with generic identifiers.
But we can automate a lot of the process and make sure everything's consistent.
Exactly.
That's a huge time saver. But can it handle those tricky quasi-identifiers we talked about earlier?
You're right. They can be tricky, but Presidio's anonymizer is pretty smart.
Okay.
You can set up rules to tell it, hey, if you see age, gender, and postal code together, treat that as sensitive information.
So it's not just about finding specific words. It's about understanding the relationship between all those different pieces of information.
Exactly.
That's pretty sophisticated.
It is, and it just shows you how powerful technology can be when it's used thoughtfully.
This is starting to sound like a total game changer for us public servants.
Yeah.
It's not just about, checking boxes and complying. It's about actually protecting that citizen data effectively.
Absolutely. It's about being better stewards of the information that people trust us with.
Okay. I'm really intrigued. Now, I'm eager to hear more about how this works in practice.
Okay.
What can our listeners expect in the next part of the deep dive?
Well, next we're going to take a closer look at what Microsoft Presidio can really do, breaking down those analyzer and anonymizer modules.
Okay.
And we'll walk through how a public servant might use it step by step in a real-world scenario.
Sounds good. Don't go anywhere, listeners. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Okay, so let's imagine you're a public servant. You've got a stack of documents, maybe applications for a program, research data, maybe responses to access to information requests.
Yeah, that's definitely something we deal with all the time.
Right, and you need to make sure that any PII is protected before you share it with another team.
Okay, so how does Microsoft Presidio help us in this situation?
Well, our public servant would start by using the Presidio Analyzer module.
Yep.
Think of it as the PII detective.
So this is where we start the PII hunt. But do we have to search through every document manually? That could take forever.
No way. That's the beauty of Presidio Analyzer. It does all the hard work for you.
Yep.
Remember all those PII recognizers we talked about? The ones that use NER and regular expressions?
The data detective squad.
Exactly. They scan through all that text and look for anything that even resembles PII.
And what happens when it finds something? Does it just highlight it?
It's even smarter than that.
Okay.
Presidio Analyzer not only flags the potential PII, it also gives each finding a confidence score.
Confidence score.
Yeah.
So that helps us prioritize what needs attention, right?
Exactly, and avoid those false positives.
So a high score means definitely PII, and a lower score means maybe PII double-check this.
You got it.
Okay, so Presidio Analyzer has scanned everything, flagged the potential PII, and given it all scores. Now what? What do we do with all this flagged information?
That's where the Presidio anonymizer comes in.
Oh, wait.
Think of it as the fixer.
Okay, so this is where we actually do something about the PII, not just identify it.
Exactly. The anonymizer gives you a whole toolbox of options for how to handle each piece of PII.
Okay.
You can redact it completely, you can replace it with a generic placeholder, you can mask it with characters like asterisks, or even encrypt it for that extra security.
Okay, so we've got options: hide it, remove it, swap it out, lock it up tight.
Lots of options.
But do we have to make all these choices manually for each instance of PII?
That's where the customization comes in.
Right.
Remember how the government of Canada customized Presidio to recognize their personal record identifiers? We can do the same thing for our own needs. We can set up rules to automate the process.
So if we know we always have to redact SINs, we can set up a rule to do that automatically.
Exactly. You can tailor the anonymizer to follow specific guidelines for your department or even for different types of documents.
That's really helpful. It streamlines the process and ensures consistency.
Yeah,
But can it handle those quasi-identifiers we talked about? Those tricky ones.
that's the impressive part.
Okay.
You can set up rules in Presidio Anonymizer to say like, hey, if you see age, gender, and postal code together, treat that as sensitive and anonymize it.
So it's not just about finding specific words. It's about understanding the relationship between all those different data points and taking action.
Exactly.
That takes out all the guesswork.
It does, and it shows the power of this technology when you use it strategically.
I'm starting to see how this could really change how we handle sensitive data.
Uh-huh.
It's not just about compliance. It's about actively protecting that data and building trust.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive and using the best tools available to uphold those data privacy standards.
So Microsoft Presidio sounds pretty amazing, but I'm wondering, are there any downsides or limitations? Nothing's perfect, right?
You're right. Presidio is powerful, but it's not a magic solution.
Okay.
Like any technology, it needs attention, maintenance, and adaptation. We can't just set it and forget it.
So what kind of attention and maintenance are we talking about?
Well, for one thing, the accuracy of its PII detection really depends on the data it was trained on.
Okay.
If it was trained on data that's biased or incomplete, it might not work as well for our specific needs.
So regular checkups and updates are important to make sure it's working the way we expect it to.
Exactly. And it's not just about the tool itself. We need to have clear policies and procedures in place for how we're going to use Presidio
Right.
and how we're going to handle the PII it finds.
It makes sense we have to use our judgment and make sure the technology is working for us, not the other way around.
Exactly. We have to stay in control and remember that human judgment and ethical considerations are really important when we're dealing with sensitive data.
Okay, so Presidio is a powerful tool, but it's not a substitute for careful thinking and responsible data handling.
Right.
It sounds like a great addition to our toolkit, though.
It is.
So where do we go from here in our deep dive? What's next?
Well, we've talked about the what and the how of PII protection, but now I think it's time to dig into the why.
The why.
Why should we as public servants go above and beyond simply meeting the minimum requirements of those privacy laws?
That's a great question. It's about more than just avoiding legal trouble.
Right, exactly. It's about something much bigger. It's about trust.
Trust. Yeah, that's a powerful word. How does protecting PII actually build trust with citizens?
Well, think about it. When people trust us to handle their information responsibly, they're more likely to use government services, share their opinions in surveys or participate in civic life. It's all connected.
Yeah, it makes sense. If I didn't trust an organization with my data, I wouldn't want to interact with them either.
Exactly. And when that trust erodes, it can have a ripple effect.
Oh, wow.
People might hesitate to participate in those important government programs or even give accurate information.
Right.
It makes our jobs harder.
So it's not just about protecting individuals, it's about protecting the foundation of how we serve the public.
Exactly. Protecting PII is about showing people that we respect their privacy and we value their trust.
Okay.
It's about being responsible with the information they share with us. And in a world where data breaches and privacy scandals are becoming more and more common.
Yeah, it seems like all the time these days.
Right. It's more important than ever for the government to be a leader in data protection.
We need to set the standard for how this information should be handled.
Absolutely. And that leadership can inspire other organizations and even individuals to start prioritizing data privacy as well.
Right.
It's about creating a culture of respect for privacy.
Yeah. Well said. I'm convinced protecting PII is a crucial part of our role as public servants.
I agree.
It's about building trust, respecting citizens, and ultimately creating a better future for everyone. But what about the future of data privacy itself? What challenges do you see coming up?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be the sheer volume and complexity of data that we have to deal with. We're creating more data than ever before from more sources and more formats.
More data, more places, more types of data, that's a lot.
It is, and as technologies like AI and machine learning get more sophisticated, the potential for re-identifying people from data that's supposed to be anonymous that's going to increase too.
Oh, wow. So we need to be even more careful.
We need to be proactive and develop new strategies to stay ahead of the curve.
It sounds like a constant race to protect data.
In a way, it is, but that's why research and development in data privacy is so important.
Okay.
We need to invest in new tools, train new experts, and work together. The government, industry, and academia all need to be on the same page.
So it's not just about technology, it's about people and collaboration.
Exactly. Technology can give us amazing tools, but it's up to us to use them wisely and ethically.
That's a good point as we wrap up this deep dive. What's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I want them to remember that protecting PII is not just a box to tick or a rule to follow.
Uh-huh.
It's a crucial part of building a trustworthy and effective government.
Right.
It's about respecting citizens, safeguarding their rights, and creating a culture of responsibility when it comes to data. It's something we should all be passionate about.
Couldn't have said better myself. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of PII to Microsoft Presidio. Hopefully our listeners feel empowered to take what they've learned and apply it to their own work.
I hope so.
Protecting citizen data is a responsibility we all share, and we can all make a difference.
Absolutely. Every step we take to protect privacy strengthens that bond between the government and the people it serves.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.